Gonna start the recording. All right, awesome. Welcome everyone, it's Careyann Golliver, America's franchise matchmaker and founder of Franchise Logic, and continuing our online summit of It's Never Been a Better Time to Consider Business Ownership in 2021, right? So start a business, buy a business, maybe buy a franchise. My special guest today on the summit is Matt Stevens. He's from Newmark Real Estate, and he's here. He's going to be, he's the senior managing director. He's going to talk to us about all things related to real estate, whether you buy a business or whether you buy a franchise. If it's a brick and mortar, you're going to have a place, right? And location. That's the most important thing when it comes to real estate. So we're going to hear from Matt on that in a minute. But just to give you some background on Matt, he is a retail broker who specializes exclusively in the representation of retail tenants nationwide. His team has closed more than 2,000 leases. That's very impressive. And 1.2 billion in transaction volume. So he is a rock star when it comes to retail real estate. His current national accounts include Ace Hardware, Mountain Mike's Pizza, DeBat Baseball Academies, and the Little Gym, just to name a few. He began his real estate career with NAI Global in 2007, serving as an account executive and overseeing the growth of several national retailers. And between 2001, 2005, he served in the U.S. Air Force as a crypto code controller for the 91st Space Commander. So welcome, Matt, to the event.
Thanks for having me.
So excited. So you were, what is the crypto code controller for the?
It sounds a lot better and cooler than it is. I sat in a room in North Dakota in Minot and maintained all of the different codes and cryptographic material that gives access to our big ICBM nuclear missiles up there. And a lot of training, a lot of background checking. And I always joke, I don't have my finger on the button, but the guy next to me did, kind of. So, but yeah, that's what I did for the Air Force. That Space Command used to be under the Air Force, and now it's moved to Space Force. And I'm kind of glad I had my term during it when I was in the Air Force, because Space Force to me still sounds a little bit different. But anyways, yeah, that's what I did.
Very cool. Very cool. So this is not your first rodeo in real estate. You've been involved in real estate for a very, very long time. And so what is the role of a broker in commercial real estate?
Great question. Brokers come in I'd say two different categories. Brokers that represent landlords. Those are the brokers with listings. So their names are on buildings. They've got signs. That's who people call to get information. They work for the landlord to bring in tenants and negotiate deals for them. And then you have a tenants broker, and that's what I do. And I just represent the tenant, typically the franchisee. That's who I work for. There'll be some brokers that may do both, and that's pretty common. Our group is a bit different. We just exclusively work for the franchisee or for the tenant. So that's kind of the role of a broker, but their role really is to become your real estate professional. If you've got a franchisee that's either they've got a territory that they've got to find a location, or say they're purchasing an existing business, there's a piece of real estate that has to be accounted for, either to assign those obligations to the buying franchisee or to negotiate a new lease if it's a territory that we got to go and open up a gym, open up a Wendy's, or whatever the franchise concept may be. So the role that our team plays as a broker is to help you find that deal, find the real estate, and then secure and negotiate the deal so that you're protected as a tenant. It's a very different world, commercial and residential real estate. There are laws that protect residents in real estate, families that have real estate. If you're living there, if it's your residence, you have certain protections that are just common throughout the US. In commercial real estate, it's different. You can sign a 2-page lease agreement, or you can sign an 80-page lease agreement. And that agreement dictates how you are going to interact with your landlord. It can become very challenging from a franchisee standpoint to quickly get familiar with all those terms and conditions and what's fair, what's not fair. And our group is on the advocacy side of a tenant to make sure that the terms that we are negotiating for them are fair, that we are protecting their assets, their personal assets, their net worth, all the things that they've spent years and years building and creating. There are some leases that can take that away from you in an instant. And so our goal is to make sure the tenant is represented and protected. So as far as the role of a broker, lots of different brokers out there. We highly recommend that a franchise business owner, they seek to have a broker that works for them and exclusively for them. It can be a little bit challenging if the broker's playing both sides or working on, for the landlord and the tenant, and it's hard to to understand, well, who is really representing me. So we always just recommend, whether they don't use our group, just make sure you work with a broker that has that's really exclusively representing you.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I'm a business owner, just a business owner, not a franchise business owner, would I be able to use your services as well?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. We work, franchises will hire us to help their franchisees all over the US. That's similar for, like you had mentioned, Ace Hardware, DBAT, Decalash, we do all of theirs. Or an independent owner that wants to start a new concept, those are always fun to work on. And if it's just their own concept, their own idea, happy to help them as well. As long as you are occupying the real estate, either you're going to buy it or we're going to lease it, we want to be the group to represent you, occupiers of retail real estate.
Right. Yeah. So as a franchisee, it's the franchise companies that you work with, you're probably already introduced in their franchise disclosure document as a preferred vendor, or maybe as a required vendor to use. So when people buy a traditional brick and mortar franchise, again, there's a journey that goes into that, because there's site selection, lease negotiations, then you can think about architects and build out, and then you think about hiring your people. You wouldn't want to hire people before all that happens, right? So what is the expected timeline? I know a lot of it is probably on the onus of the owner to get back to you, but you probably work with them collaboratively, I could imagine, in really putting boots on the ground and trying to find possible site selections that would work for the franchisor, for the franchisee, for a win-win scenario. And then lease negotiations is a whole nother next step that goes into that. So would it be fair to say, Matt, that if you're a franchisee and you're just driving around caveman style, looking at locations, you're probably wasting a lot of time?
Maybe. I found that, and we have offices all over the US, and we have partners in every market that help us, like you said, scout those sites. Yeah. And every time we receive an assignment, we engage that local broker guy or gal to help us. I found that, these folks that are coming through the franchise system, or they've been thinking about running a business, they kind of know where they want to be. And usually they're kind of right on key with where they want to be.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think so. The franchise may give them some parameters on geography. They may tell them, hey, these are the types of centers, and just helping them understand maybe different center types. But for the most part, if they're living and working in their market, they kind of know where the best centers are to be. They may shop there already, and they've probably envisioned their business in one of those locations. My experience has been that for the most part, the local franchisee does have a good idea of where they need to be, but it's getting into that spot that becomes a challenge. If you are driving around, like you said, caveman style, and just calling on signs and calling on listings, the broker that answers that phone is going to say, all right, I've got this, and they may receive a dozen calls just like this. Who knows how real this interest is? Maybe you're not asking the right questions on the phone, but at the end of the day, that broker has to determine, am I going to spend time with this person that just called me out of the blue? Do I know much about them? Do they have qualifications? Have they met with a lender? is this real? And so the feedback, the response times can kind of lag, they can be difficult. It's a much different scenario when, say, I call or one of my brokers calls on a property on behalf of the tenant. They know right away, well, Matt or whatever tenant broker, they wouldn't be calling me unless this was a qualified deal. And they're going to do a lot of the heavy lifting here. I just have to play catch, receive offers, provide information, and let that tenant broker work with the franchisee and then get back to me with offers. So our calls are returned pretty quickly, and we usually have some type of deal experience with these different landlords and brokers, so they know, hey, yeah, if Matt's team or the Newmark team is calling, most likely this is a qualified individual behind the deal, and that's a very easy way for them to send us the information and then wait for us to give them the offer. So if you're going it alone, like you said, just driving around, while you could be looking at the right real estate, getting in there is going to be that's the challenge. They just don't get a lot of the response, I think, that brokers that represent tenants would get.
Yeah. So it might not be a total waste of time, but they shouldn't bother calling the phone. The phone number, they should rather, make note of those locations they like.
Sure.
And then
have the broker do it.
Yeah. Or whoever. Yeah. Have the tenant broker. Yeah. And to your point also, I think it's really important. If I was looking for real estate, I wouldn't want a broker that works on both sides, right? I would want someone that is totally devoted to my needs and looking out for my best interest, not to try to, be a moderator for both sides and
exactly
have a win-win. And so I know, lots of franchise companies that require their new and existing franchisees to use specific companies like yourself because it shortens the timeline. Again, get you to the front of the line with the right people at the right place. So let's talk a little bit about any kind of concessions pre-COVID, during COVID. I mean, again, I think it's never been a better time to possibly have some negotiating power with some landlords that are sitting there with empty spaces. What are your thoughts on that, Matt?
Yeah, great point. And COVID did really highlight what tenant types were going to be a challenge. That was retail and hospitality. We saw the vacancy rates for retail centers and for hospitality, that's hotels, skyrocket. Tenants weren't even available or able to open and run their businesses. And if they did, they were restricted pretty significantly in how they did it. A lot of those tenants, unfortunately, aren't going to be able to come back. Some of them have been able to last with PPP and some other incentives to keep them going. But we've seen that there is inventory, there is availability in retail, and landlords that are anxious to get tenants in. Those ones that are more anxious than others are going to have good concessions. I'd say, offering money to do your build out, attractive lease rates, maybe below market lease rates. Those are kind of the top two that really matter to a tenant. Is, hey, how much do I have to spend to get my space ready, and how much do I have to pay in rent to make that work? The landlords that the retail centers that are in the greatest need are going to offer you the best rent and the highest amount of money in the form of an allowance to build your space, and that's what we look for now. And we probably see that through this summer, towards the end of this year. Okay. But with a lot of the changes with the COVID vaccine and a lot more confidence, I think, in the retail sector, more money will come back into retail, and some of those what we call the COVID deals, they'll start to go away.
Yes, yeah, they're not a forever thing,
right?
Thankfully or unthankfully, right? I mean, we got to keep moving forward, coming out of this.
Right.
And so, would you say, like, if they gave 3 months of free rent or paid for your entire build out, that would be a huge victory, right?
Well, yeah. And look, it's going to depend on each market. There are some markets that have fared pretty well, others that have not. And so it will vary market to market. As far as concessions, really what it comes down to, take it aside from, the environment and with COVID, they want to know, well, how long of a commitment are you going to give me? If it's a 5-year lease term, you may be able to, secure a couple of months of free rent and maybe an amount of money. If you sign a 10-year lease term, you're going to improve those terms quite a bit. most institutional landlords, and that's typically who owns the nicer retail centers, they're interested in 10-year money and good credit from whoever's signing the lease. So if you are a franchisee, or if you're looking to own your business and you've got good net worth, and you've got good credit, and your assets are strong, you're going to get better terms than others out there because you present less risk. And that's the name of the game right now, is risk for landlords. Remember in 2008, when we had our Great Recession, there was, retail was impacted quite a bit, and we had a lot of available space that needed to be absorbed. We needed more franchises coming out and rolling out new concepts to absorb that vacancy. Those that had good assets, high net worth, were able to secure better terms because they just presented less risk to a landlord. And the same is true now. Any lender that's involved with a landlord's asset will look at the rent. They'll also see, well, who's paying it and what's their financial standpoint. And if they've got good credit, they typically are going to be looked on a bit more favorable than others. So while there are some combinations of what you need, a good market, or higher vacancy to get preferred terms, I would say that those tenants that have good credit, that have a good net worth and provide, I guess, a low risk to that landlord, they're able to secure the best terms out there, lowest rents, good improvement allowance, free rent periods, limited guarantees, all those things they can really push for because they're less risky.
Yeah. So, and you mentioned a couple times good credit. So define good credit for today's market.
So I would say that if as far as credit scores, that may not be looked at as much. It's net worth. Yeah. If you are able to have, $500, $750, $1 million plus in net worth, yeah, that starts to put you in a better category. Sure. Depending on the size of the deal. If it's a small little 1,000-foot last extension franchise, for instance, they may not need to have that type of net worth. But net worth to a landlord means, okay, if the business struggles, and it might, or if something were to happen where the business were to struggle, does this operator have the capacity, the financials to support it? That's what matters. And if the answer is yes, now we've got less risk associated with this operator. The bigger the space, if we're talking, a 5,000-foot gym or a 15,000-foot hardware store, we need to have a higher net worth as the space increases, because the lease commitment is going to be higher, obviously. Higher rent on the bigger square footage. So you need to have those net worth numbers will need to increase incrementally with the size of the deal. Okay,
fair enough.
And a lot of franchises will have certain requirements and thresholds. Yes. And typically once they've been approved by the franchise, then it shouldn't be that much of an issue. It's kind of standard for that group.
Yeah, because the franchisor should be pre-qualifying before they even award.
Correct.
Yeah. So, I think a benefit of working with a company like yours and a team like yours is, I would say probably 90% of the people that buy brick and mortar as a franchise owner have never dealt with commercial real estate ever. So they wouldn't really even know how to go about it. But I think, would it be fair to say that your team really acts as bad cop and allows the franchisee to be good cop, because the franchisee really has to have an ongoing relationship with that landlord, and you guys can go in and kind of push a little bit harder for those negotiations because you can, and because of who you are and the ability that you've been able to do with all these other franchises, right? So you have more leverage. Then again, just driving around caveman style and saying, oh, well, my buddy with the same franchise got this, and so you need to offer me that, right? The landlord's going to be like, whatever, call me like never, right?
Right.
So
no, you're absolutely right.
I think that's a huge role that you also play, is really, not to say that you are being a bad cop, but you are really playing a harder game because you know and respect and understand that the franchisee has to have that nicety relationship with the landlord moving forward.
Yeah, it really provides Yeah, it provides an installation to that important relationship, as you mentioned. We can be a bit of a bulldog mentality, which is needed, I think, to achieve certain terms. And the franchisee is able to say, well, yeah, that's the broker that I'm working with, and they're able to kind of be insulated from some of those tougher discussions.
Right.
At the end of the day, what we care about is that the franchisee, their assets, what they've been able to build over years and years of saving or whatever, are protected, and that they don't lose them in a game that they may not be just well versed in how to play.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that have you found that prior to or even during COVID, or maybe now that we're coming out of COVID, I mean, have you found that has that changed the mindset of who the landlord wants as a tenant?
I would say that it may have reduced some of their, maybe what they had required before. Again, if there's a competitive environment and the landlord needs to be more aggressive to attract tenants, they've got to do that. Some markets may not be that way. For the most part, retail, though, as I said, was hit pretty hard during COVID. And so a good landlord that wants to fill their center will offer incentives and do what they can to attract, those few tenants that are out there right now. Yeah. Others may say, look, I'm going to wait. I can see that if I can wait till the end of this year, maybe things will improve. And if I don't have to take a haircut now on my rents, I don't want to. So there will be some groups out there that may have stayed well heeled during the whole pandemic. So the goal would be, hey, find those that are hungry for a deal and may have better terms.
Yeah, I was speaking though specifically in regards to categories. Are the landlords pickier in regards to, well, we don't want a massage place, or we don't want a massage place, or we don't want another gym, etc.
True. There are certain categories that I would say they're the top three in retail. Those are ones that aren't going to be impacted or have actually thrived during the pandemic: grocery, pharmacy, and hardware. Those are your three daily needs. Usually if there's a neighborhood center that has those three, it's a very good center. Those coffee shops tend to do okay. Those restaurants tend to do okay because the grocery is driving a lot of foot traffic, the pharmacy is driving foot traffic, and hardware is driving foot traffic. Those three daily needs are tougher than, say, other categories to maybe online types of sales. You still, if you're in the middle of a project, you're going to go to the hardware store and get what you need. If you're making dinner, or if you're just running to the grocery store, sometimes it's not as convenient to order online. And then pharmacy, it's still something where a lot of the pharmacy pickups are required to happen there at the pharmacy. So we call that kind of the trifecta when it comes to retail. Those are very good daily needs. When it comes to a brick and mortar location, they have done well through the pandemic and have been considered essential. So if you can look to a center that has those categories, your business will do very well. So landlords feel that way too. Hey, if I know that this type of business has had troubles in the past, or hey, I've had 100 nail salons, I can't deal with another one. Yeah, there may be some maybe deal fatigue or category fatigue, if you will, with some of these landlords. But those top three will always kind of be the ones that drive those neighborhood type centers.
Yeah, that's a good point. So obviously, I stress to all the candidates that I work with, and I think this is pretty logical thinking, but it should also be stated that any outside advisor, it's really important that you choose the right outside advisor for the task that you're having them do, as opposed to just asking someone, give me your opinion on this, that, and the other. And that's not really fair, because if they're not educated in that arena, you're really asking them to give you an opinion on something they possibly cannot, right? So the difference, obviously, between a commercial broker and a residential broker is?
I would say that, residential they're typically transferring deeds, they're selling homes, and there are a handful of things that you may be able to tweak: the purchase price, maybe some type of a repair or improvement, but really you're transferring the deed. Commercial real estate, especially on the tenant side, is done through leasing. And now you've got a 40 to 60 page document that dictates how we interact, and that can be different from everybody. Even in the same center, you'll have different terms with different
Really?
tenants. It's all not standardized, right? Maybe I've got signage abilities that you don't have because I negotiated, hey, I want the pylon signed, but I also want to be able to sign the back of my building. And if you do that as part of your initial deal, they can't take it from you. It's very hard to include that after you've already signed a lease. Hey, I noticed that so-and-so, they've got additional panel signs. I'd like to do that. That's going to be a very hard thing to do once you're already in there and paying rent. So that's one small example of the many ways that you're going to interact with your landlord. And we help to referee that and make sure that it's fair and equitable, and that you aren't being penalized or put in a position that is unfavorable to you as a tenant. Our real value, I believe, comes in negotiating the terms of the lease and making sure that we're protecting the business owner, the family that's behind that signature. At the end of the day, that's what franchise real estate or franchise businesses are about. It's, families, and you're going in and competing with corporate retailers and big money retailers out there. I've seen leases and deals where it just seemed like it was just so one-sided in favor of the landlord. We get excited doing deals and making deals that protect that family, make them a lot of money, and we come out looking really good.
Yeah, for sure. Excellent. So what's the biggest mistake that a new business owner, franchisee or non-franchisee, can make when it comes to real estate?
I would say that what we typically see as being problematic, especially when we're brought in to renegotiate or fix a lease, is just how much was given as far as security, how much they were personally going to guarantee in their lease. That limits you. If you have a full guarantee for a 10-year lease period, that can amount to a lot of money, but it also means that you are, your ability to go out and get other debt, your ability to sign a guarantee on something else is now limited, because now you've got a 10-year commitment for this lease amount that you are personally obligated to. And it may limit your ability to grow. Maybe you're doing very well. Maybe you want to open store or location number 2 or 3 or whatever. That personal guarantee could limit you from going out and getting a new SBA loan to go and fund, the next venture or the next location. So I would say that the biggest mistake, other than not using us, right? Going it on your own is the biggest. That's a very don't use us, fine. Find someone like us and work with a broker. Other than that, I would say just committing way too much of your personal assets to a deal.
Yeah. So I think really the message is don't go at it alone.
Right.
For sure. And to just, really leverage the services that a tenant broker would offer, that's going to make sure that they're really overlooking everything and making sure you're not really signing your life away and,
right.
Really going to have some regrets. Is there an average term, or do you see them really all across the boards?
Average terms typically are in the 5 or the 10-year initial term. So typically 10 years is, hey, if you want to line that up with your franchise agreement, sometimes those could be 10 years. Maybe your SBA loan is 10 years. So now I want my lease. I want those all to coincide together. That's the initial term, meaning your first term with that owner. Right. 5 or 10. After that, it's just 5 years. Typically, it's a 5-year, and we'll negotiate options for you. We'll identify what those rents will look like in year 10, year 15, and even year 20, where you don't have to commit to it, but you'll have a point down the road where you can say, yeah, I'm going to exercise my option. I'm going to stay another 5 years at those terms that my broker negotiated 10 years previously.
So right of refusal.
Yep, exactly. You have, we'll always build in whatever the initial term may be it 5 or 10 years, but at least another 5 or another 2 5s to make 10 of extension options. Mm-hmm. You want to control that space and that rent for as long as possible. If we're getting short-sighted, thinking of year 1, 2, or 3, yeah, I know that I'm going to mature my unit at this point. I'm going to make this kind of money. Great. Well, don't forget that there's still rent down the road. And if we've got the landlord considering us now, we've got some leverage. Let's secure those things so we don't have to worry about it. There's no better feeling than signing a lease after 5 or 10 years. The market explodes, but you've got lease rates from 2004, 2005, whatever the case may be. Feels really good that you've controlled that occupancy cost outside of paying your employees or yourself. That's going to be your biggest cost in the business, is how much you pay to rent. So we want to control that as much as we can.
Yeah. Excellent. Those are all wonderful points. So, did you have anything that you were going to be offering just as maybe a top 10 checklist or anything for people that may want to drive around before they actually hire a company like you?
Sure. Take note of the centers, not only during the daytime, but when is your business going to be operating? If you're operating at night, go at nighttime. What's the nightlife like? Are there people hanging around? Do you feel safe there? Do you feel like your customers will feel safe there? And then look at the synergies and the co-tenancies. There may be certain tenants that are going to be a problem for your business. If you have a lot of young kids coming there, you may want to stay away from centers that have a rowdy bar, or maybe a smoke shop where you may have some folks hanging out and loitering around. Take a look at the center's appearance. Is it well kept? That's part of the landlord's obligation. If it's not well kept and there's trash and it looks like the landscaping's kind of run down, it's important to understand that, one, because you need to negotiate that those things get fixed, or two, hey, this just may be a poorly run center, and it's something to consider. So I would say that, wherever they are in their market, know who the synergies are, who should you be next to, what are good, synergistic types of tenants, and then which ones are problematic that may deter footsteps into your business. At the end of the day, this is all about driving footsteps right in front of your storefront and getting them to come in the door. And if there's anything in that center that's going to promote that, great. If there's anything that's going to limit it or inhibit it, then we need to be aware of it, and it may cause us to move on.
Yeah, and I would think parking also is probably a big deal.
Yeah, parking's a big deal. There are tenants now that we never thought they'd look at drive-through, and now drive-through has become kind of an important component of their business as they look toward the future. And hey, there may be customers out there that aren't comfortable getting out of their cars and have during COVID gotten very comfortable sitting in long lines, in a drive-through, not just food users. And so they're looking at that to kind of change their business model and, again, increase the ability to bring a tenant or a buyer or a customer to their space.
Right. So again, it's all about experience the customer has
Yeah.
going to get your product or service, and or convenience, right? I think
Right.
convenience is probably the new speed to, what people are really the new currency, really.
Yeah. And I think retail has always been about convenience. If you think about, when you talk location, it's all, hey, what's most convenient, what's easily to access, parking that you don't have to worry about. That was all just magnified during COVID, that it became, that much more important to get, hey, those few folks that were out there traveling around, you wanted to get them to come to you no matter what. And so what could you do to, remove any barrier?
Yeah. Yeah. So if you just bought a gym, you're certainly not going to want to go into a center that has a vaping store right next to it.
Right.
Something like that, or a liquor store on the opposite side, or maybe you do. I mean, I don't know, maybe you could have happy hour over there, but after people work out. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot that goes into, my point being, of finding the right location that's going to drive the traffic, because with a retail-based business, you are solely relying on the foot traffic, right? So
Right.
You need to make sure that a lot of those boxes have been checked. And so hiring a company like Matt and Matt's team can really save you a lot of headaches. And plus, just going through the agreement, the lease, really understanding what you're signing on to, all of that requires significant caution. And so I think, what you guys are doing for business owners in general is phenomenal service. And anyone that I speak to, whether they buy a franchise or a non-franchise business, certainly am going to recommend you and any other company that can provide that service. And you guys work nationwide, right?
Oh yeah, every market. I've done deals in every state, and small, little tiny towns to big cities. There are, if you look at our tenant roster or clients that we represent, you can see those needs everywhere, So we do have a lot of experience all over the U.S., and there's not a market too small or too rural for us to help out on. And it's a gratifying job, I think, working for a franchisee and an independent business owner. Much different than, say, structuring a lease for a corporate user where it's maybe some faceless entity, and they're just receiving some return, and they've got 1,000 locations. It's different when when a family has done well and they start to succeed and prosper. It's a very different, gratifying feeling. We really chase that. We like that. And the best thing is we're free. Landlords are similar to residential. Landlords pay the fee and it's split with us. So nothing is paid out of pocket from the franchisee to work with us. It's just we are their representative, and whatever fee is paid, we split that with the landlord's broker. So it really is a benefit to the business owner to look for a group like ours that'll represent them.
Yes.
As I said, most times there's no cost to that business owner to do so.
Yeah, that's awesome. Wonderful. Well, Matt, thank you so much for joining and sharing all your expertise with retail and real estate for business owners. And I'm sure we'd love to have you be added sometime in the future.
Happy to. Thank you.